So in this lesson, we're going to be setting up JSON server and running it locally. So this gives us an opportunity to run our own JSON database locally and also interact with it with the various methods to access the resources, modify the resources, get content from the endpoint. So this is going to be simulating an endpoint on the server, and typically if we do have the data within a database, the server, the backend code is going to get that content from the database server and output it within a JSON format. And then with the JSON format, which is being simulated here, we can connect to it from our front end code by making a request to the endpoint. So that's going to be coming up in the next lesson. This lesson is all about installing Node, setting up the Node package manager, installing the JSON server, and then also running the JSON server database so we can be ready for the next lesson when we interact with the content. For the upcoming lessons, you are going to have to install Node, as we're going to be using a Node package and running Node as our backend code, connecting to it and simulating connection to the server and also to a database and database content. Node is available at nodejs.org, and then you can download the Node version for your system. So they've got a version for Windows, Mac, and just the source code for Linux. And also for the different bit versions. So there's the 32-bit and the 64-bit that can be downloaded for Windows. So once you download and install Node, you're going to have Node on your system. And in order to interact with Node, this is going to be done with the terminal, where we're going to be accessing the file system on the computer. And for a Mac, you can open up your terminal by pressing the command plus space. And that will open up the Spotlight, and then within the Spotlight you can search for terminal, open up the terminal, and you're going to have to navigate to where your file directory is. I've created a separate folder. I've just given it a name of Node, and that folder is where I've got the index.html file and the apps.js file. You can list out the files within your directory with ls. On a Windows machine, it's dir. So for directory, to list out the folders that are currently within your directory. And the rest of the commands are going to be the same for Windows as well as for Macs. And again, I am using a Mac. For Windows, you can open up the command terminal. And there's also some additional terminals that can be downloaded. So there's open source terminals that you can install on Windows in order to access your file system. So once you have Node installed, you can check and make sure that you do have Node by typing in node-v, and you should get a version being returned back. So this is the current version that I have installed on my system. So type in node-v, and that will install and show you which Node version you have. Also, we are using Node Package Manager. So this comes as part of Node when you're installing it and downloading it. In case it didn't, you can go over to npm.js and install that separately. And in order to make sure that npm is installed, you do npm-v, and that will return back the Node Package Manager version that you have installed on your system. So as long as you're getting versions being returned back for Node and for Package Manager, you're going to be ready to move on to the next part where we're going to do the installation of the package. So the package that we're going to be installing is the JSON server, and it's available at npm.js.com/package. You could also search for the JSON server package. There's quite a lot of downloads for this package, so it's a fairly popular package, and you can literally set up your REST API in less than 30 seconds. So there's really no coding involved. As long as you've installed Node and you've got the Node Package Manager ready, you can just do an install of your JSON server. So doing an npm install -g, and the -g means that this is globally installed. And they do have a sample of a db.json file. So you can create that db.json file in order to set up your database. I'm going to start out with the default JSON file and open up the editor. And I'm going to just create this on the same folder directory that I've got the index.html and the apps1.js file. So just create a new file, paste the data, and then this needs to be saved as the db.json file. So go ahead and save that, and then we're going to be accessing this with the code. And also, I do have the terminal right now has navigated over to the same folder directory. So I can list out ls, and there's my database file. So I'm ready to launch the Node application. And that can be done with JSON server, watch, and then selecting the file that we want to watch. And then we can go to the endpoints for the local host and get the requests from there. So going back into the terminal, we want to launch the db.json file with the JSON server. And if you get this error message, command not found, that means the JSON server is not installed. So you can select the npm install and globally install the JSON server. If you are not able to install it on a Mac, to set the permissions to install as admin, you can use the sudo npm install -g JSON server. So that will allow you to do an install as the administrator. So if you do throw any security errors or any issues, then you can do that as well. So it just takes a few seconds and it should install fairly quickly. And these are the permissions issues that you might encounter. So this just means that your application doesn't have the right permissions. So add in on a Mac, add in sudo, and on a Windows machine, generally it should run as the administrator as long as the terminal is being run within the administrator. So also sudo npm install, and let's try that one more time. So it's going to be asking me for my system password. So type in the system password, and now it's going to be installing it as an administrator. So that will be providing access to the computer's file system to do the install. So now we've got the install done. I'll clear out the console content. And now I should be able to do the JSON server and watch the database file. So once we have this up and running, and once you've got the JSON server installed, now you can go to localhost and you can request to the posts. So also go ahead and try that out and just make sure that you are getting some type of response there. And if you update the database, the JSON, so if we were to add more posts there, I'm going to do a toggle here of the JSON data. And comma separate them. So I'll add in another post just to make sure that we do have the live data, and save it. And now when I refresh it, there's my data that's coming in. So I can use this now server as an endpoint to make connections. And also within the terminal, they listed out the other options that we have. So we have for comments, and then we also have for profile. So all of these endpoints are also driven by what we have here within the main object. So they are the property names of the objects. So we can add in additional routes and additional JavaScript JSON object as needed. So now when I check the routes, I've got a new route here for tester. If I want to list out everything that's available there, and if I want to select, so if I want to select a particular posts, so I could go to posts, and then using whatever the ID is, this can return back the post. So this would return back the second post, and this would return back the first post. So also within comments, it's going to work the same way. If I want to return back the first comment, I can do comments 1. If I try to return back a comment that doesn't exist, I'm just going to get a blank JSON object being returned back. So once you have set this up, and if you just go to the base URL, it's going to list out the JSON server information. So this is just something to keep in mind, that it's not listing out the index file, it's running the JSON server. And it does list out the resources that we have here, and we're also able to access it, get, post, put, patch, delete options. So we can modify the resources using any HTTP method. So going back into index, we're going to open this with live server. So our editor with live server, and then make a fetch request to the new endpoints that we've just set up. So that's coming up in the next lesson. So this lesson was a setup lesson to set up your local JSON server, customize your database with some content, and then coming up next, we're going to interact with that content. Task for this lesson and before the next lesson is to install Node. So go over to nodejs.org and download the version of Node for your system, and then open up your system terminal. So on a Windows machine, you can do the command, and on a Mac, you can open up within Spotlight and do a search for terminal. So shortcut to open Spotlight is command plus space. And once you've opened up the terminal, check to make sure that Node is installed. Also make sure that npm version is installed. And you can do that by typing node space -v and npm space -v. And that will show you the versions of each one of those. Create a db.json file locally. Add valid JSON data and set up your custom routes if needed. I would suggest to start with just whatever the default data is available on the server and on their website, and try it out first just to make sure that you get it up and running. Install the JSON server on your system, again using the terminal. So npm install -g for the global flag and JSON server for the package that's being installed. Also, if you do encounter any permissions errors on a Mac, prefix it with the word sudo, and that will allow you to accept permissions and run within admin. And then once you've set it up, run the JSON server package. And the command for that within the terminal is JSON, JSON-server, SERVER, space -- watch, WATCH, and then space whatever the file name is where you've got your JSON data. So in this case, we're using the default, which is db.json. And also open it up within your web browser. So go to localhost :3000 for port 3000 and check out the documentation that's available now within your local machine. And coming up next, you're ready to access those endpoints. And then this is all going to be done locally.